I now call this episode to order. Hello and welcome to the Brewster Call, a voice of reason in a world of chaos. I'm your host, Jason Brewster, and it's come to my attention that many of you possibly do not know who I am, because I have a new audience. Not only is there a YouTube audience, but also this is being live streamed on Spencer Cable Access. So hello! For those of you who do not know the strapping young lad sitting in front of you today, my name is Jason Brewster. I'm a man who wears many hats because there are more hats than people willing to wear them. I've served in many roles in my life. I'm an Eagle Scout, a child of God, and most importantly, and most recently, I was elected as moderator of this great town of Spencer. But above all of them, the one I hold most dear is that of a citizen. In fact, I hold a deep fundamental belief that no matter what position one may ascend to, one of moderator, one state rep, governor, or even president of these United States, that the highest possible honor is that of a citizen. Everything else is just temporary, and yet you're always a citizen. Therein lies the question, what is a good citizen? And so, before I begin, I do wish to say that this is purely in my capacity as a private citizen. Do not let any of the views expressed on this channel, the Brewster Call, to be representative of the town of Spencer or myself as moderator. With that out of the way, I wish to have a very, very happy birthday for America. Obviously, this episode will be uploaded on July 3rd and rebroadcast on July the 4th of 2026. That is 250 years since our great American Revolution was kicked off by the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Before then, there had been tensions shot heard around the world at the battles of Lexington and Concord. There were a lot of attempts to broker peace between the king with the olive branch petition. There we go. And, the colonists, they're like, listen, I really don't want to go to war, but, what other choice is there? And so they task a small delegation consisting of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin, to get together and draft these documents, the Declaration of Independence. Now, the timeline here is a little interesting. On June the 28th, about when I'm recording this episode, was when the famous painting with John Trumbull that was commissioned under Thomas Jefferson's presidency, that was when they first read the Declaration of Independence in front of the Continental Congress. On July 2nd was the date that they actually signed it. And John Adams, I guess, is quoted in a letter saying, hey, for years to come, July 2nd will be the day celebrated as our great, day of independence, and there'll be fireworks and something like that. But July 4th is when they actually sent it out. Now, feel free to send an email if I get the timeline wrong there. Again, I'm working off the dome, so, thebrewstercall@gmail.com. If you have any issues, send it right there. But the point being is that this was a long and arduous process. A year had already passed from April 19th of April 19th of 1775, shot heard around the world, and July 4th of 1776, when they signed the Declaration of Independence and sent it off. And so, people tend to think of the Revolution as if it's this, it all happened at once, but there was active warfare and we had to fight for the rights that we now enjoy as citizens. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. The men who signed the Declaration of Independence realized something rather morbid. They were signing their own death warrants. If they did not get their way, and the battles went the other way, and Britain won, which by all means should have happened, they were toast. They would be tried and hung as traitors to the crown. Ben Franklin had said so himself when he morbidly joked, "We will all hang together, or most assuredly we will hang separately." And many of the founders did experience a lot of hardship. The one I can think of is a guy by the name of Robert Morris. I know about this story because I recently attended a summit called Forged Leadership Summit in Nashville, Tennessee, and a man from the Illinois Policy Institute was there giving a speech. And he had spoken about how each state, in his case Illinois, in my case Massachusetts, has the ability to impact national policy, really upplaying the virtues of federalism and saying how great they are. And one thing he said is that original painting by John Trumbull, commissioned by Thomas Jefferson, which was the reading of the initial draft of the Declaration of Independence. One of these men was a man by name of Robert Morris. Now, one of the first continental currencies was this guy, Robert, the Morris notes, all right? This man was such a wealthy merchant that the entire currency was named after this guy. And so he's this rich, wealthy aristocrat who is quoted as saying, like, the only thing that matters is that my children get a hold of this business. And that's what he cared about. That was his tone going in. But then the Declaration is read. These words that so moved all of these men into giving up and pledging to one another and to their posterity their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And Morris recalls that he had tears streaming down his face because he knew that freedom was worth it. He knew that whatever he had said before was wrong. Those words inspired him to sign. And by the end of the Revolutionary War, this man died broke, penniless. All of his money had been funded towards the war effort. And so there are so many stories of men like this who actually did give that full measure of sacrifice. That when they signed that declaration, it was their death warrant. They were tortured, they were killed. And so it's our obligation today to truly consider, what does that mean for us? What gift have we been given? I know many people tend to take their conception of citizenship as a granted. I'm a citizen of the United States. I can, do whatever I want and, go around burning stuff. And I just think that people need to understand that there are both rights and obligations. We teach this in citizenship and the nation merit badge in the Boy Scouts. A citizen has a right to vote. That's, the rights they have are enumerated in the Bill of Rights and elsewhere. You have a right to a fair and speedy trial. You have the right to free speech, right to not have soldiers drawn and quartered in your homes. You have a right to bear arms. And all of these rights are, written into the Constitution, but there are also duties, right? There are things like voting, which you don't have to do, but you probably should. And just a sidebar here, the town of Spencer, guys, 15 to 16%, let's bump those numbers up, all right? Don't just pop out when there's overrides. Come in all the time, because municipal elections are the most important election that directly impact you. So when I think and I reflect upon the founders, and I think about how our country lasted 250 years, I cannot help but think that we must be more grateful for what we have. A lot of this is unseen in American history and in history generally. I think the Constitutional Convention is a pretty good example. They took the types of government of oligarchy, monarchy, and democracy and kind of put them all together. The House of Representatives and the Senate had aspects of democracy, given, representative democracy, that the people voted for their representatives and senators, and it, was more broad. The Supreme Court had sort of an oligarchical, it's the rule of the few. And the presidency had aspects of the monarchy, and they set up the system of checks and balances that were, I hate to say it, revolutionary, right? Typically you have just a king, and he rules by, decree, or you have just a mob rule that, you start getting heads chopping off if you talk about the French Revolution. Talk about failed revolutions, geez. But all of this is to say that the founders, no matter their flaws, were very wise men who knew not to put powers that government is given into the hands of just one man or a few men. In fact, they deliberately made government slow and arduous because they know about human nature, and they know that people generally get this tendency to fight and to squabble, and that is kind of built within our system. The Constitution was not made for the times, it was made to stand the test of time. They understood that they didn't know everything, so they added amendment process and how to, hey, if we want to change it, we can. We are the great inheritors of something incredible. Something that history seldom produces. It's unique. And I think in the next 250 years, we ought to keep that in mind. Were the founders perfect? No. But they sought for a more perfect union. And that promise is not dead. In fact, it is very alive and well. Whenever that promise has not been taken to the full extent, people have challenged it. The civil rights movement called out those sorts of inequalities. If you go back to the Civil War, that was a fracture that almost tore our country apart. And so, we may not be perfect, but each person must look around and see where things are not perfect. And instead of just calling it out, or yelling, screaming, come up with a productive idea. We have people, and I understand, everyone thinks, oh, the government sucks, and listen, I'm right there with you. But if that attitude prevails, that there's nothing we can do, then you're right. And so my calling to everyone here, or everyone who will listen, is to go forward with that knowledge, in that gratitude of the beauty that you have been given. Have the joy in your heart. And then act accordingly. I keep coming back to this idea of what does it mean to be a good citizen? And that's something that I think this show will cover quite a lot. We all have a responsibility to advocate in a way that people understand, in a way that is prudent, and in a way that actually gets things done. I have seen way too many families ripped apart due to petty politics and disagreements. We're America. We're better than this. And frankly, I think that people are way too focused on what tears us apart and not what unites us. We have a shared common creed, a shared inheritance that we have been given. And the people that are willing to spit in the face of that and say that we're all bad are just as to blame for the division as the people who defend it and say that we're all good. My Commonwealth Honors Project, which I did for my final year of education at Westfield, it spoke about two prominent historians. It was David McCulloch and Howard Zinn, who wrote 1776 and A People's History of the United States, respectively. And I realized that they were sort of on kind of opposing sides, in the sense that one was, sort of sweeping under the rug things that have been bad, and the other was only focusing on what had been bad. And my conclusion there was that American history is neither all good nor all bad. It is nuanced and complex and ought to be treated as such. And just as we look in the past that is as such, we must look to the future. Don't look at your fellow countrymen and see opposing sides. Look at them and see a citizen whose opinions may be wrong, may be right. It's your duty to approach this with a level of civility which I think has been lost in recent years. I wasn't expecting this episode to go really into that. I was honestly expecting to talk about the Founding Fathers for a while. But I think that we can learn a lot from the Founding Fathers' example and bring that forth into our lives today. Yes, they were a rowdy bunch who sat in a hot room in Philadelphia and duked it out. And yes, there were soldiers on the battlefield fighting, but they sought out every diplomatic option before they went to revolution. I mean, you gotta understand, John Adams, Sam Adams were sort of the rabble-rousers, like, yeah, let's get to it. But most of the Founding Fathers did not want a violent and bloody revolution. As I said earlier, they knew we shouldn't have won. You have to understand, it's a ragtag group of militiamen against the greatest army in the world. Okay? What are the odds that these smelly group of farmers outdoes the United Kingdom's or Britain's military, okay? Like, that doesn't happen. They say that the sun does not set over Britain because they had territories everywhere, okay? The fact that the founders were able to pull that off, I mean, I gotta say, I'm impressed. And I'm not just speaking about the founders as this broad concept. I think as a student of history, one starts to realize that people don't listen to history because they think it's boring. Because they are like, oh, what are we gonna learn from a bunch of old white dudes? There's a lot we can learn from history, and I think part of what I want to do on this show is also to expand upon some of those stories and make them in a way that are interesting. I'm sure there are episodes to come about Calvin Coolidge and George B. Cortelyou, the 25th and a half President of the United States, and many other statesmen and people who have made an impact throughout history. There are many things I wish to speak about. A lot of them are big ideas. Some of them are a lot more smaller and down to earth, but all of them are, for the end, what makes a good citizen? How do we take the inheritance that we've been given and to go forward in that pursuit of a more perfect union? How can we as Americans move past our petty differences, our squabbling, our infighting, and come to an actual productive outcome? This is the end, or ought to be the end, of all levels of government, from federal to state to even local. And as a private citizen, I pride myself on being a good listener, on not passing judgment about one side or the other, to ensure that everyone's getting a fair shake. In this climate we find ourselves in, where people are more likely to call each other names, I think that I can really lead by example here in being a good citizen, in speaking about issues cogently and in a way that people will understand and identify with, but also giving a platform to have out those conversations in a way that is diplomatic and fair. I want to hold everyone to a higher standard here. That we're better than this as a country. We have been given such a beautiful and blessed gift. And so my challenge to all of you at home, don't wait. Act today. Be grateful that you have been given the gift of freedom and liberty, not just as abstract buzzwords, but as something that you can live out today. If you hear anything from this episode, hear this. The American founding, those ideals are still alive and well within the fabric of our republic. No matter how muddled and faded or hidden they can be, they still exist within the fabric of every American. And we owe it to our forefathers to be better, to do what they would have wanted, to have the conversations, no matter how difficult they may be, for a more productive end, for a more perfect union. I wanted this episode to be a lot more poignant, a lot more heartfelt than, the call to action. Because you have to understand that men fought and died and bled out for an ideal that we're still seeking to make more perfect today. And irregardless of where you come out on, are the founders good, are the founders bad, the founders are what they are. And they've given us something that we cannot spit in the face of, that we cannot squander. It falls incumbent upon all of us to be good ambassadors for our beliefs, to ensure that if our message is not being heard, well, how do you not understand me? Is it that you disagree? Or is that you misunderstand or strawman what I'm trying to say? Don't call other people names. For they are a citizen too. Don't spit in the face of your fellow countrymen, for they are a citizen too. I think I can only just barely scratch the surface of what does it mean to be a good citizen, because it is a way of life which transcends me sitting here as a 23-and-a-half-year-old. It is something that the most perfect citizen will be striving to be that for all of their life. But that's what the founders would have wanted. To preserve a more perfect union, we must ensure that we are coming at it from the right angle. To ensure that we, as a nation, will long endure. And stealing a quote from Abraham Lincoln, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, will not perish from the earth. That falls on all of us. Thomas Jefferson once said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And so it falls on us on this blessed birthday, 250 years, to be eternally vigilant, to act out in the ways prescribed by us, as no matter what the news may tell you. I mean, I'm inspired by the World Cup. I think about all of the people coming from Ireland and all across the world to watch their favorite football game, and all the Irishmen in Boston. It warms my heart, because that's not the type of news that people see. People are accustomed to the fighting, And I wish to say to all of you that, sure, fighting may exist. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. But how we respond to it is what matters. How do we as citizens react to disagreement? Do we call other people names? Or do we sit down and have a conversation with them? I don't know about you, but I'm for the latter. I submit all of this episode for your humble consideration as thoughtful citizens. Thank you very much for watching the Brewster Call. God bless you, and happy birthday, America. Thanks for watching the Brewster Call, and a special thanks to Spencer Cable Access for helping me record this episode. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything to add, please reach out to thebrewstercall@gmail.com.